Under the dazzling lights of the most awaited wedding in Los Angeles, everything seemed too perfect to be true. Hope stood in the middle of a flower-filled garden, where each white rose petal gently swayed in the wind, where each guest seemed to be witnessing a new chapter of happiness. Liam looked at her, his eyes filled with love, while Brooke stood behind, her face radiant, but hidden deep within was an unnameable fear. None of them knew that this sacred moment would become the nightmare that opened a chain of endless tragedies. When Beth walked up to the stage to read the blessing, she held in her hand a blank piece of paper that Thomas had secretly placed there. But instead of words about love, about marriage, about eternity, Beth began to read a buried truth, that she was Thomas and Hope's daughter, that Brooke had kidnapped her as a baby, then arranged everything to bring her to Liam, making the whole world believe that she was the crystallization of Hope and Liam's love. The room fell silent. Every sound of wind seemed to stop. Thomas didn't appear immediately, but his shadow, the shadow of a man who had lived with obsession, loss, and a yearning for recognition, seemed to loom over them all. Brooke paled, her eyes wide with horror, unable to form words. Hope dropped her bouquet, the petals flying and falling like the fragments of a fading dream. Liam stepped back, staring at the woman he loved with disbelief. Beth's words stabbed everyone in the heart. Thomas stepped out, slowly, passing each person like a soul reclaimer. He didn't need to say anything, because the truth spoke for him. For years, Brooke had tried to hide, to create a false world, to keep her daughter from getting involved with Thomas, a man she believed was dangerous, haunted, and unworthy. But it was that fear that drove her to sin. Brooke had arranged the kidnapping at birth, given the child to a middleman, and then quietly returned the child under a different identity, as if fate were mocking them all. Liam had raised the child, unaware that he was living with a colossal secret. Thomas's mind was flooded with images of the past, the nights he'd struggled, the years he'd been scorned for his affection for Hope, the times Brooke had pushed him out of her life at all costs. It was all returned in a cruel moment. Hope trembled, unable to distinguish what was real from what was a lie. She remembered the days of doubtful pregnancy, the nameless nightmares, Brooke's over-interference in her personal life. The pieces began to fit together into a horrifying picture. The DNA test was silent, but heavy with judgment. The final result was beyond doubt. Beth was Thomas and Hope's biological child. Brooke's explanations now made no sense. Her whole life collapsed in an instant as the trust of those she loved turned to dust. Thomas, even with the truth, could not find peace. He had spent too many years in the dark, and now that the light was shining, it was too bright, making him unable to recognize who he was. Hope collapsed in guilt and horror. She loved Liam, but her flesh and blood belonged to Thomas. Liam fell into a despairing void as he realized the marriage he had tried to save was just a stage set by sinful hands. Brooke tried to reach her daughter, but Hope looked at her like she was a stranger. Outside, the wind picked up, blowing the white silk curtains around the garden apart, exposing secrets everyone wanted buried deep. Their whole world was stripped bare. And in the midst of that brutal silence, only one cold question echoed in everyone's minds. If this truth had been hidden for so long, how many other secrets were waiting to destroy the rest of them? Under the light rain, the test report still clearly printed the undeniable confirmation. Beth was Thomas and Hope's biological child. Everything Hope had believed in, protected, lived for, now vanished like smoke and dust. She sat silently in the cold, white hospital room, where the smell of disinfectant mixed with indescribable pain, where each drop of time slowly passed as if teasing her torn soul. Thomas stood there, silent, his eyes unable to hide the torment, because even though he had longed for this truth, now it had become a double-edged sword that cut deeply into everyone. They had had a moment of weakness, a night lost in loneliness and hurt, when both of them lost their way, when forbidden feelings turned into something that burned only to leave a wound that could not heal. And the result of that night was Beth, a child Hope had raised with unconditional love, unaware that she was her own flesh and blood and the man she once considered the biggest mistake of her life. Hope's anger exploded like a storm. Every memory of Brooke came flooding back, every word of advice, every act of protection, every kind look now turned into a lie. Brooke had taken away her years of motherhood, had turned her into a person living in illusion, had raised a child who should have been loved with truth in a lie. Hope left the mansion Brooke was trying to save, taking with her whatever remained of the betrayed trust. In her heart, a new fire began to form, not just of grief, but of determination to take back what was hers, no matter what. Thomas followed, not with promises or explanations, but with the eyes of someone who had lost everything and now didn't know how to keep anything. Between the two of them lay a thin line between guilt and fate. As they looked at Beth, they both realized the truth that made this child a symbol of tragedy. Hope felt her heart break as she realized that she had lulled her own maternal instincts to sleep, had smiled at her child without knowing that she was looking at her own flesh and blood. In the long nights, she remembered every moment, every time Beth called Mom, every innocent look in her eyes, and every word that now rang like knives piercing her mind. Thomas, on the other hand, was at war with his own conscience. He loved Hope with a love that was despised by society, disapproved by his family, and tainted by his own past. But now, with the truth revealed, he became the father, no longer the desperate pursuer, but the one responsible. He knew that every move would shape Beth's future, but he also knew that walking with Hope would cause the entire town to seethe with judgment. Hope decided to cut Brooke off completely. She didn't want to hear any more excuses. Every time Brooke tried to get closer, Hope saw the image of the woman who had robbed her of her motherhood. She may have thought she was protecting her daughter, but to Hope, it was an unforgivable sin. Brooke stood in the empty house, watching her once proud child turn away, and felt a fear she had never felt before. Fear of being forgotten, of being rejected, of being punished by her own flesh and blood. Hope returned to the Thomas cottage, where Douglas was playing innocently, unaware of the storm brewing. The look in the child's eyes made Hope choke up, because now she understood that maternal love did not come from pregnancy, but from an invisible bond arranged by fate. When she saw Thomas holding Douglas, a strange feeling rose within her, a mixture of love, fear, and long-suppressed passion. She knew they were about to become a family, not by choice, but by undeniable truth. But deep down, Hope also knew that this step would make her the center of judgment. Liam, who had been her husband, who had promised to protect her, now looked at her with suspicion and disappointment. To Liam, Hope had betrayed not only him but also the image of the woman he loved. But to Hope, that love was now just a broken mirror reflecting the lies that had once covered her life. In her mind, a haunting question echoed over and over. Could she truly find peace with the man who had led her astray, or would accepting Thomas and Beth open a new chain of tragedies? As night fell, Hope stepped out into the backyard, looking out at the distant town lights flickering in the fog. She heard the wind blowing through the roof, a warning from the past that all truths come with a price. Brooke stood still in the old house, looking up at the broken family photo, while Thomas held Hope's hand, both of them looking at Beth and Douglas playing in the moonlight, two innocent children unaware that their future would be at the center of a new war. Somewhere beyond that fragile border of peace, public opinion is stirring, whispers, contemptuous glances, questions about morality, love, and sin begin to form. And in the midst of that storm, there is only one final image left in the viewer's mind. Hope standing between two children. Behind is Thomas. Ahead is the road leading to the days of being surrounded by prejudice, where no one knows whether this is the beginning of a love reborn or the end of all the souls who have loved the wrong person. Can Hope save her heart, or will she become the successor to the tragedy her mother created? In the luxurious but cold space of Spencer Publications headquarters, Wyatt walked among a series of screens broadcasting negative news about the corporation. Each headline was a stab at his family's reputation: financial scandal, crisis of confidence, stock prices in free fall. Wyatt knew that without a miracle, Spencer would collapse, and he would go down with it. So he turned to Taylor, the woman he both respected and desired, but also the only one with the ability to remake his public image through the power of psychology and media. When Taylor entered the room, Wyatt sensed a change in the atmosphere. She still had the confidence, but her eyes were experienced and defensive. Taylor knew this was more than just an invitation to cooperate. It was a silent cry for help and possibly a trap. The closed-door meetings began, the air thick with tension. Taylor studied every piece of media data, every weak point in the old campaign, while Wyatt sat across from her, his eyes following her more often than looking at the report. Old feelings rose like burning ashes, things they had buried because they knew they couldn't cross the line between reason and work. But this time, the closeness was more dangerous than ever, because behind every look, every gesture, a secret was growing like an undertow. Taylor sensed Wyatt was hiding something. The short phone calls, the encrypted emails, the quick trips out of the office in the middle of the night, all of it a series of signs that made her instincts rise. Wyatt talked about saving Spencer, but there were pauses in his voice that made Taylor realize this was more than just a business battle. When Taylor stumbled upon a forgotten file on his computer, she understood that Wyatt was in more than just a media crisis. He was investigating Ridge, her father. A secret plan involves gathering inside information about Forrester Creations, possibly to take down a rival or cover up something Spencer himself did. In that moment, Taylor faces a dangerous choice: protect her family or continue working with a man who is using her as a springboard for a larger conspiracy. She decides not to back out, but to stay, feigning ignorance to get inside Wyatt's game. From there, every meeting becomes a battle of wits. Taylor takes soft control with her intelligence, quietly expanding her sphere of influence within Spencer, exploiting every loophole in Wyatt's plan to understand what he's looking for. She knows Wyatt isn't evil. He's just desperate, obsessed with proving himself to his father's legacy. But that desperation makes him a threat. And it's in that infiltration that Taylor begins to feel her heart waver. The late nights, the unavoidable glances, the heavy silences make her realize she's falling into the same emotional hole, one where love and betrayal go hand in hand. When Wyatt discovers Taylor has hacked his data, rage erupts. Trust shatters. He feels betrayed, while Taylor finds herself hurt by her trust. They both realize they've lost the line between duty and emotion. Wyatt wants to save Spencer, but in the process, he's sacrificed truth, honor, and the only person who believes in him. Taylor is faced with a choice: continue to be a pawn in the games of powerful men, or stand up and confront the very person she once loved and wanted to save. She's torn between the logic of a professional and the weakness of a woman. The night before everything fell apart, Taylor looked out the glass windows, where the city lights cast a hazy shadow, wondering if love could survive in this world of lies. Wyatt stood alone in the empty conference room, looking at the media map and the strings connecting Spencer and Forrester, knowing that one wrong move would bring everything he had built down. They both knew the game was out of control. When the day of the press conference to announce the new campaign arrived, all the lights were on Taylor and Wyatt. They had to stand side by side, smiling for the cameras, while inside, their trust, their honor, their hearts were crumbling. And when the meeting ended, Taylor walked out of the Spencer building, leaving Wyatt with a blank look. She didn't know if she had just escaped a dangerous game or lost her last chance to save him. Outside, the sky was gray and dusty, the Spencer billboards still lit up, but inside, the empire was starting to crack. A cold question echoes in Taylor's mind like an echo of conscience. In a world where everything is priced in power and secrecy, is love still strong enough to survive? Or is it just another tool in a ruthlessly calculated PR campaign? After that day, things seemed to be settling down, but it was really just the calm before the storm. Wyatt began to see cracks spreading throughout Spencer Publications. A few strategic partners abruptly withdrew their funding, and anonymous articles began appearing online, claiming that the PR campaign was just a cover for a covert takeover. Each article was a stab at Wyatt's pride, and in them he recognized a familiar style: The meticulousness, the deep understanding of media psychology, and the ability to choose the right moment to make things dramatic. Taylor. The name rang in his head now, not with desire, but with fear. She fought back, and she did it perfectly. Taylor didn't hide. She appeared in exclusive interviews, not attacking Wyatt directly, but every word she spoke painted a portrait of a man lost in the shadows of power. She described a leader trying to save the company by sacrificing his own soul, without naming names, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The media was abuzz. Wyatt was backed into a corner, forced to speak out. But every attempt to argue back made him look even more pathetic, like someone trying to stop a storm with his bare hands. Deep down, he knew Taylor wasn't acting out of revenge, but out of warning. She wanted him to stop, wanted him to understand that what he was pursuing would destroy not just Spencer, but himself. But once power tasted blood, there was no stopping it. Wyatt returned to his original plan, to finish gathering information on Ridge, weaponize it to regain control of public opinion. But when he dug deeper, he discovered something he hadn't expected. Ridge wasn't the real target, but merely bait. Someone within Spencer was manipulating him, using him as a tool to bring down both the Spencer and Forrester families at the same time. Someone with access to data, the ability to change his media strategy, and his every psychological weakness. Taylor. No, not her. Wyatt denied the thought, but the suspicion grew. Taylor, too, realized she was being pulled deeper than she had intended. The documents she'd sent to her middleman to get Wyatt to stop had been edited, and turned into a media weapon against Spencer. Another force had stepped in, using her conflict with Wyatt to manipulate them both. She felt watched. Anonymous text messages, dropped calls, and an unmarked envelope left on her doorstep containing photos of herself and Wyatt during a late-night work session, evidence ready to be released at any moment to ruin her reputation. Taylor began to feel scared. Not scared of losing, but scared of being drawn into a war with no way out. She once believed she could control the story, but now the story was rewriting her. Wyatt came to her, his eyes a mix of anger and despair. He asked without words, just looked. And Taylor understood that there were no boundaries between them now, just two people caught in the intertwining layers of conspiracy. They decided to work together one last time. Not for Spencer, not for fame, but to find out who was manipulating them both. Over long nights, they sifted through data, code, old reports. Each piece of the puzzle brought them closer to the truth, and closer to the abyss. Finally, they discovered a name in the doctored media files, Bill Spencer, Wyatt's father, the man who had taught him to win at all costs. It turned out Bill had never trusted Wyatt enough to give him real power. He had created a fake crisis, forced his son to fight, and then orchestrated the entire PR campaign to test whether Wyatt was ruthless enough to be Spencer's heir. Taylor was just part of the experiment, a tool used to trigger Wyatt's emotions, to push him to the edge. When Wyatt realized, his anger overcame all reason. He confronted Bill, but his father just laughed coldly, saying that if Wyatt were truly strong, he wouldn't let his heart get in the way of his mind. The words broke something inside him. Taylor tried to stop him, but Wyatt disappeared in the biggest media storm in Spencer Publications' history. He released all the evidence of Bill manipulating public opinion, influencing political deals, and manufacturing fake crises to consolidate his power. The result was a few days of the Spencer empire collapsing, stocks selling off, investors fleeing, and a federal investigation of Bill. But that victory didn't set Wyatt free, it just made him the hunted. Taylor saw the news of Wyatt disappearing overnight, his car found on the edge of a cliff, no body, just his phone, and an old photo of the two of them. She didn't know if he was alive or dead, but she knew one thing: he wouldn't let it end like that. And somewhere, in the darkness of the city, a message came to her phone, just 2 words: not over. Taylor stood by the window, the dim light of dawn illuminating her face, where the serenity had been replaced by a quiet fear. This story wasn't over. And in a world where all truth is a media product, who knows what's real and what's fake? Or is love, once again, just a tool in the hands of the most skilled manipulators?